We'll be starting in just a minute. Anti-Human Trafficking Learning Summit, Protecting Children in the Digital Age, Solutions for Preventing Exploitation and Trafficking. We'll start in just a minute. All right. I want to start us off today. I want to welcome everyone to our summit today. It should be a great day in terms of some of our panelists and speakers. We're very excited about everything that we're gonna be talking about today. I'm Bob Sanborn. I'm the president and CEO of Children at Risk. We're a statewide organization in Texas focusing on the whole child, research and advocacy, but we've also been at the forefront of the fight against human trafficking for about 20 years. And we were doing anti-trafficking work in Texas when people didn't even know what it was. I remember very early on being up in Dallas doing a presentation to foundations, and someone came up and said, "You misspelled traffic," because they just had never seen the word, human trafficking before. And so we've been doing this work and doing this work also in Austin in terms of legislation for many years, going back to working with both sides of the political aisle when then Attorney General Greg Abbott was learning about human trafficking. He helped us, along with Democratic State Senator Leticia Vandepute out of San Antonio, and so many others across the political aisle working to stop trafficking. And for that reason, we have developed this really in-depth knowledge around trafficking. And so today, as we start focusing on some of the other things around trafficking, sort of trafficking in the digital age and the ability for technology to be used in the exploitation and trafficking of children, it's something that a lot of people are going to find of interest, but it's a deadly serious issue for us as we focus on this. A couple of years ago, before the pandemic, Caroline Roberts, our general counsel, who is the moderator today for this and does a lot of our human trafficking work at Children at Risk. She and I and some other staff took a group of people and we did a trip around the world, seeing how different countries were reacting and trying to solve human trafficking and trying to work with survivors on some of the best strategies. And I remember being in the Philippines and being very shocked that a lot of the trafficking was happening around technology, where very young girls were being used and exploited technology-wise. And for me, it was sort of this dawn of like, technology is going to be used for a lot of bad things, and it should not have been a revelation. But I think over the years, we've seen more and more of this abuse of technology in the abuse and exploitation of children, and we'll try to explore that a little bit more today. The other thing is that I think this is an issue that gets a lot of attention. Part of it is because of Hollywood. Hollywood finds this to be an issue with a lot of sizzle. Yes, most of the stuff that they portray is probably wrong or misinformed, but it makes sure that human trafficking gets a lot of attention. And so we have this ability to take an issue that's getting a lot of attention that to date has mostly been bipartisan in nature. Both parties want to solve this problem. Maybe some don't give as much to victims in terms of restoration as we'd like to see. Some are guided by some sort of false narratives. But I think the idea is that we're all on the same page in terms of solving this issue. And so our hope today is that we begin to talk a little bit more about this so that we begin to have a common understanding of where we need to go around technology and children and human trafficking in this digital age. And so let me bring out our moderator today. She's the general counsel and the director of public policy at Children at Risk. And that slide, Caroline, is a reminder that I want to thank our sponsors, Uber, who's a long-term sponsor of our work in the anti-trafficking realm, and HEB. For those of you that aren't from Texas, it's like everyone's favorite grocery store in Texas. They're also a sponsor and someone who's really helping us in the fight against trafficking. Caroline, for you, when we did that trip around the world, what was the thing that sort of stood out the most as it relates to the work that we're doing today?
One of the things that really stood out, were how important the relationships were in healing, and then just the incredible amount of work that survivors were doing, not just to um, in their own recovery, but for each other, and how giving they were, and just that survivors are really that peer support was so incredibly important and so healing, and that was really really cool to see.
I think it was very interesting for us to see that so many times in the United States, we think we're at the forefront. And to
Mhm.
see how some of these countries were doing far better work with survivors than we could even hope to be. I thought that was another interesting point. So, anyway, I know you didn't expect me to ask you a question, so I threw you off. So, but thank you, Caroline, for you and all of the team, Miranda and Erica and Bree and all of those that are working on putting the summit together. But I'm going to turn it over to you and take it from there. Thank you so much, Caroline.
Thank you. And thank you so much to everyone for attending today. I'm going to start off with uh, the Texas policy landscape, really looking at artificial intelligence, emerging technology, social media, and child exploitation. So we know that these are all potentially tools that we use in our daily life, in our professional life. They can be used for good, but they can also be used for evil. Next slide. First, talking about AI and emerging technology. So we've all heard a lot about artificial intelligence in the news. And again, a lot of you have probably used it at work. It is great for building capacity. However, there has been this increase in reports of AI generated child sexual abuse material. So using AI platforms to actually create child sexual abuse material from an innocent image, and then using that to sextort, groom, recruit, or otherwise harm children. So again, in the news, I'm sure you guys have seen these reports of sextortion, where a young person was approached by usually a stranger online, often on a social media platform, convinced to send a picture of themselves that constitutes CSAM, and then that picture is used to sextort them. I think that AI has really changed the game in that you don't even need to send that picture, right? And it really, really changes things on how we talk about protecting our children, because I'm a new parent. We feel like we can tell them what not to do, and then they're protected. Well, this has changed things, because now no matter what they do, even these very innocent images can be used against them. Same thing for grooming, recruitment. And we've also seen in the news these reports of students actually creating and then widespread distribution in schools, images of these other students. So in North Texas, Ellison Berry, a 14-year-old, has gone public, which is incredibly brave. And she is one of the young women behind the Take It Down Act, which is a federal policy that is currently being considered that would protect children against some of these deep fakes and this AI generated CSAM. Next slide. When we look at social media and dating platforms, in 2021, which is the most recent year of data that we have, the Polaris Project, the largest kind of clearinghouse for data in the US, they also run the National Human Trafficking Hotline. From those calls that they received from the National Human Trafficking Hotline and those victims that they identified, 65% were likely trafficked online and recruited online. So that number is actually a little bit down from 2020, 72%. But for the past, 5+ years, that online recruitment has been the most common way that human trafficking survivors are brought into this victimization. Next slide, please. Last session, House Bill 2700 by Representative Guillen expanded the definition of child pornography, which is how it's referred to in the statute, and included those images that can be recognized as a real individual and those likenesses of someone under 18 that were generated through AI. So this is a great first step. And for many legislators and people in the public, this feels like, okay, we have it covered. However, there are some additional challenges. Next slide, please. For one, there is a 2002 Supreme Court decision, Ashcroft v. Free Speech Coalition, that has some troubling protections for CSAM that is computer generated. So the CPPA, which was established in 1996 by Congress, the Supreme Court found it overbroad and unconstitutional. It targeted sexually explicit images that appeared to depict minors, but were created without using real children. And so in this decision, the majority found that one of the decisions that was cited as precedent, Ferber, that actually what was protected there and what they were trying to protect against was the harm that producing CSAM inflicted on the children in the production of the CSAM. In other words, it's not that these images existing in and of themselves that Ferber established that was harmful. It was the harm that was inflicted on the children in the production of the CSAM. Now, I think we on this call can all agree that the mere existence is also harmful. As well, this was in 2002. AI has come a very, very, very long way from what we had in 2002. And so I don't know that the Supreme Court could have ever envisioned what we have today and how quickly these images and how realistic these images are. Next slide, please. So we're dealing with that Ashcroft decision. There's also challenges around proving that this relates to and is significantly similar enough to a real child. What can we do next? So there are laws, as I mentioned, at the federal level that we hope for and will advocate that they pass, but at the state level in Texas, criminalizing the creation of AI-generated CSAM depicting a child under 18 and getting a little bit more specific with that language. So we have Senate Bill 20 by Senator Flores, Senate Bill 1621 by Senator Huffman, and House Bill 418 by Representative Johnson. And all of those bills include language that makes it a little bit easier to prove up how that computer-generated image, the AI-generated image, is related to the actual child that is being victimized. A private cause of action for minors whose image is used to create AI-generated CSAM in House Bill 421 and 581. So that is giving the minor the ability to sue not just the person who created the CSAM, but also the platform that allowed it. Next slide, please. Providing schools with guidance on investigating and disciplining deepfake material, or that AI-generated CSAM, both the images and the videos. House Bill 615. I think this is going to be extremely necessary, just like we had those public awareness campaigns for students when they were exchanging pictures of one another and distributing it and saying, hey, this is child sexual abuse material. You cannot possess this. You cannot distribute it. Again, there's this kind of misunderstanding sometimes amongst students of what they might think as a joke when we know that it's incredibly, incredibly harmful to that person. And it could live on the internet and affect that person's future job opportunities, not to mention just the invasion of privacy and trauma. So really helping students understand what they are doing and the rules. We have to establish those rules first. So this provides schools with guidance on how to investigate and discipline deepfake material. And I think that should be followed up with those public awareness campaigns, kind of similar to what has been done in the past. House Bill 186, this would actually completely prevent minors from holding social media accounts. So anyone under 18 could not hold a social media account. We know those social media accounts are being used to not just distribute this AI-generated CSAM that I've talked so much about, but also in grooming, in recruitment, in exposure, which I think my colleagues will get further into, in the normalization of an objectification of women and girls and men and boys. So this would prevent minors from holding those social media accounts and from being exposed to so much. We've seen similar bills passed in other states like Florida, and it will be interesting to see kind of where that age falls if it is passed. And then non-consensual publishing of deepfake videos and explicit images, Senate Bill 441 and 442. I bring this up, it's not limited to 18-year-olds, although it does cover 18-year-olds, but it also gives adults a cause of action if their image is published without their consent. So these are the bills that we're watching and looking at for next session. It's not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the ones that in some cases we've seen them move really, really quickly. And we're very happy to see how the Texas legislature has focused on this issue and is trying to be at the forefront on this issue. We're extremely grateful. With that, any questions? I guess I will open this. Please feel free to drop it in the Q&A. I don't see any. As a reminder, we will be taking questions in the Q&A throughout. Even if the speakers don't have time to answer after their session, we encourage speakers to answer, just type out an answer. So please, if you have questions, continue to drop those questions in the Q&A. With that, I am going to turn it over to Jasmine Vasquez. So Jasmine is going to share with us some of the testimonies and real life insights from clients that she has served who have been exploited online. She'll delve into the common patterns observed in trafficking cases, some of the effective intervention strategies, and what we can do, the immediate actions that we can take, and what we can do to protect these vulnerable individuals. Please join me in welcoming Jasmine Vasquez, Program Director of Paso del Norte Center of Hope.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you everybody for being here this morning. Thank you to Children at Risk. My name is Jasmine Vasquez. I'm the Program Director with the Paso del Norte Center of Hope. And like Caroline said, we'll be sharing a little bit about what are some of the things that we are seeing here locally in El Paso, Texas, in regards to youth engaging online and some of the scenarios that we have come across. But then also sharing what are some of the preventative measures that we can take, us as advocates, as teachers, as parents, and information that's out there that you all can access in order to keep your kids safe. Next slide. So like I said, it's a bit of a cyber safety / human trafficking 101. Again, very general information to kind of shed a little bit more light on the topic. Next slide, please. We do want to give a quick content warning. Like I said, I will be sharing a little bit about some cases that we have seen, give some examples, and we want to make sure that everybody on here takes the time to take care of themselves. Some of the information can be a bit triggering or traumatizing. So please make sure that if you need to step away and take a minute, please do so. Next slide. Okay, so we want to share some of these images because this is a lot of times what we tend to hear as advocates when we share the word human trafficking, right? Or when we ask what is human trafficking, a lot of the responses that we get tend to be like, it's when someone's kidnapped, right? Or when someone is taken. And we don't want to diminish that definition or say that it doesn't happen. It does. But the reality is this is rarely what we are seeing these days. And largely, again, what we are seeing is this long process of grooming that is happening pretty much virtually on some of the different social media apps, some of the gaming sites, right, where the trafficker is getting to know their victim very, very well, and then start that process of grooming and eventually exploitation. So we want to kind of, dispel some of those myths before we get into it. Next slide. And I do apologize. I am recovering from a small cold, so if I start coughing, I apologize. We want to really quickly go over the definition of human trafficking, right? Which is a crime involving the exploitation of someone for the purpose of compelled labor or a commercial sex act. And again, that's usually through the use of force, fraud, and coercion. We want to make sure that people have that understanding of what it is to be trafficked. Like Dr. Bob Sanborn explained in the beginning, right? A couple years ago, there was very little information known about what trafficking is or what it looks like. And so we want to make sure that people have some of that language to put to it. The other really important thing is that when we are talking about any minor, right, anyone who's under the age of 18 who's induced to perform a commercial sex act, it's a crime regardless of whether or not there has been any force, fraud, or coercion. What does that mean? So let's say, for example, we have a youth who has been kicked out of their home because they maybe came out to their parents as being gay, and now they're on the street. And that youth then decides to engage in survival sex because that is what's going to provide shelter for them. It's what's going to provide food for them. We still understand that that youth is a victim of trafficking because they are still being induced by whoever is soliciting from them, right? Whoever is buying from them is still exploiting that minor and that youth. So it's something really important that we keep in mind. And of course, that's just one example of the type of CSA that we see. Next slide, please. We also want to make sure that people have an understanding of the differences between trafficking and smuggling. Especially, I think for us, we are, in the border region, we are on the border with Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. And so there tends to be a lot of confusion sometimes between these two types of crimes. The main thing to know is that when we're talking about trafficking, again, it's about the exploitation piece, whereas with smuggling, usually it's voluntary and it's transportation based, right? Someone is crossing a border. That doesn't mean that the two can't exist at the same time. A lot of times cases of smuggling lead to trafficking. Trafficking rarely is a predecessor to smuggling, but we want to make sure that, again, that we kind of share a little bit more about that and that people have an understanding that these are two different types of crime, but they can coexist at the same time. Next slide. When we talk about who is most at risk, again, we talk a lot about this type of work, and this can pretty much happen to anybody. But we realize that youth who have higher vulnerabilities are going to be more at risk. And so this is not obviously a full list of those vulnerabilities, right? Vulnerabilities can look very different. We all have them. But this is what we tend to see. And usually we tend to see youth and young adults with multiple of these vulnerabilities when we do come across them and when they have been identified as victims of trafficking. Next slide. And we have a couple of statistics that we wanted to share. Just some of the facts, right, again, about what it is that we are seeing across Texas, but also in our community. The bottom two statistics that you see on this slide pertain to our agency. So 14 years old is the average age of our current Center of Hope youth clients. And so again, we work very closely with other community partners here to help us identify youth who have been exploited or trafficked. And again, the majority of those that have come through our agency were between ages 14 and 15. And again, the majority of our clients that are coming to receive services from our agency, 60% of those have been minors. So again, it speaks to how how prevalent the issue is, but also how easy it is, I think, for people to maybe think that this isn't something that is as serious, right? Or that is happening online, which is something we'll get into. Next slide, please. So what are some of the red flags that we look out for when we're talking to any youth, right, that potentially we feel might be at risk or have already been identified as being exploited? Again, this is not a full list of those red flags, but again, this is what we tend to see coming through our agency. And so we want to be very careful, again, of like making sure that when we are working with youth, whether it's in a school setting, through agencies providing victim services, or just out in the community, that these are some of the things that we can look out for. Again, some of the vulnerabilities that we want to make sure that we are keeping an eye out for. Next slide. And so now we'll do a quick switch and talk about some of the case studies that we are seeing, and do a deeper dive into the role of social media and how some of these cases are coming about, right? And how some of our youth are using social media, but also how traffickers are using these tools, right, that keep us connected in order to also traffic and exploit youth. Next slide. So what are some of the things that we are seeing? Two of the cases that we've recently had come in through our agency were referrals that we had from partners at FBI, our local FBI agents. And from these two, we know that one of the youth was engaging on Discord, which is a gaming app. If you look at the bottom of the slide, you have the Snapchat app, and to the right of it, you have what looks like a little purple controller. Discord is very, very popular with our youth. And as a matter of fact, it's marketed to youth, right? It's marketed as a gaming app for kids. They can log on, connect with others, and use different games on it. With these two particular cases, one of the youth that we were referred was using this social media app, and that's how she became connected to an online group known as 764. Now, we don't have too much information right now about this group. What we learned from our FBI partners is that it seems to be a network of people online, kind of identified as a terror group. And what they are doing is, again, they're looking for youth online. They're connecting with kids and convincing them to either record themselves committing sexual acts or cutting themselves, self-mutilation, and recording that and sharing that online. And so again, this is something that is very, very horrifying to hear, horrifying to know that there's people out there that are taking advantage of kids in that way. Unfortunately, right, it's something that is happening. And so for us, it's been really eye-opening to be able to work with these two cases that came from here locally in El Paso, these two youth that live here. And the more we talked to them, the more we found out, again, that these were the individuals that were connecting with them online were not physically here in El Paso, right? They're somewhere else in the United States, possibly outside of the United States. We're not quite sure yet. But what we also learned and continue to learn is that of these two youth that we have been working with, the more we talk to these two young ladies, the more we find out, like, again, some of those different vulnerabilities. Both of these two young ladies had a history of sexual abuse from a family member. Both of these young ladies, that information had not been disclosed. One of them had disclosed it, and again, that kind of was shut down by their own family members. And so again, there were things there indicating, right, how they were high risk. And unfortunately, in their cases, they went on to connect with people to try and find someone to build a connection with online. And what's very unfortunate about that is that there are people out there looking to take advantage of that. And that's exactly what traffickers are looking for, right? Those vulnerabilities. And these were, again, to really, really young people that, again, just wanted to find that connection with somebody, wanted to maybe have those feelings of belonging, and unfortunately ended up connecting with people that just did not have their best interest in mind. We had another case in which this young lady, 14 years old, also very vulnerable. She came from the foster care system. Her mom passed away at a really young age. Stepdad kind of moved on with his life, remarried, and didn't really want to be the one in charge of this young lady and her younger sister. She ended up connecting to somebody on Tinder, which is a dating app for adults. But again, like we normally see a lot of these, excuse me, a lot of these social media apps or dating apps, a lot of times they don't have those protections, right? They're not creating these apps with protections for kids in mind. And what's very disheartening is to see that there aren't a lot of times those protections, but yet they're marketing the social media apps to kids. So she, ended up getting a Tinder. She lied about her age on it in order to like engage. She connected with someone who was actually a Fort Bliss soldier here in El Paso, and this was something that did make the news once it came out. And he proceeded to, abuse her. And this is one of those where we want to make sure to kind of like talk about, because again, when we talk to law enforcement and when we talk about some of these cases, a lot of times the blame is put on that youth, especially because they'll say, well, she lied about her age on the social media app. And we say, like, understandably so, right? Yes. But at the same time, once we talked to that youth, there was full understanding by that adult man that this kid was a kid once they started talking and physically engaging. He knew she was 14 years old, right? And so he continued to talk to her and he continued to groom her, and then proceeded to abuse her. And so again, I think those are some of the very important things we have to talk about. Again, it's very unfortunate, right, that these things are happening online in spaces where a lot of times adults might not have their eyes on kids. But it's something that we want to make sure that we can provide more information for, and talk about, like what are some of the protections that are out there. Next slide, please. So again, what are some of the types of technology that we are seeing? For sure, social media, right? Snapchat, Omegle, TikTok, OnlyFans, Grindr, Tinder, etc. I'm not sure if many of you here are familiar with Omegle. It's like an online, again, another online like video chat platform. But basically it can connect you to anybody, and it does it kind of like a relay system where it like randomizes videos and then it like automatically will connect you to a complete stranger on the other end. Again, very popular with youth, right? Very popular with even with like influencers, right? As a means to like gain popularity online and create kind of like this content. But also very, very, very dangerous, and a very easy way for people to connect with youth and kids, right? And kind of exploit that in a matter of seconds. OnlyFans is another one too, another website, right, that is used. And again, it's supposed to be only for adults. But again, as we know, usually a lot of our kids are very savvy with technology and they find ways of getting around some of those protections. And so we've seen some of our really young, again, like students here, high school, middle school, who end up creating an OnlyFans thinking, it's a quick way to make money. And then before we know it, right, things kind of escalate. And then that youth is sharing that content online and is no longer comfortable with that content being on there. But then unfortunately, they feel like they're stuck in that situation, and they feel like they're stuck because now this is kind of like their main form of income or their way to make money. So it's something that's, again, a very, very complex and something that I think has to be explored a little bit more. But again, that technology is out there already, so we kind of have some catching up to do when it comes to these social media sites and some of these websites. Um, and then we have gaming systems, other devices like PCs, laptops, tablets, pretty much anywhere that, or any kind of device that connects to the internet, anywhere where you can get access to the internet, online games, chat rooms, right? Those are going to be places where we're going to find your kids are going to be more at risk, right? And again, it's one of those very hard things to discern because with anyone who's 14, 15 years old now, those kids have grown up with this technology. It's very much a part of their everyday life. So the thing we have to do now is try and talk about like how do you integrate this technology in a healthy manner? We do parent presentations all the time talking about this kind of stuff. And we have a lot of parents who will say, well, my kid's not going to have a phone till they're in high school or till they're out of high school. And we're like, okay, well, that's great. But we also understand that kids are very savvy and they're going to find ways to get their hands on a phone, right? They have friends who have multiple phones. They have friends who have other kinds of technology. And again, it's just part of their everyday life now. Schools a lot of times assign either tablets or computers to their kids to do their homework online. And again, kids are super smart and they find ways to get around some of those maybe like protections that are on there and unfortunately end up maybe on adult themed sites or just in places where they shouldn't be interacting. But again, it's part of that conversation of like the technology is already here, right? AI is already here. We might as well figure out how to use that responsibly and teach our kids how to do that responsibly. Next slide, please. So we have a little bit of a recruitment example here going on, and this is on Snapchat. As you see, like there's kind of like this message happening in the background. And this isn't like an uncommon thing for us to see, again, especially with like our high school students, our middle school students. I think right now, as a society, our kids are really trying to connect, right? And so that's, I think, one of the biggest needs or sometimes even vulnerabilities that we see is that we are seeing how people really want to connect and feel seen. And they're doing that online, which again, it's not a bad thing, but that's also going to bring about more risks. And so again, what are some of the safety features that we have, right? How can we make sure that we keep kids safe? The main thing is, right, knowing what privacy settings are available, what parental controls are available on this technology, doing the research on the technology so that you know, right, how to set these settings. Modeling online healthy behaviors is huge, right? If we as adults cannot model how to practice safe behaviors and healthy behaviors online, then how can we expect our kids to? And then, of course, having conversations online. Having conversations about how to interact online on a daily basis, I think at this point is something that we're gonna, need to start doing more. Again, as parents, as caregivers, as teachers, right? Again, this technology is very much integrated into everyday life in our classrooms, at home. And so, again, doing our diligence of like doing the research and having those conversations about what it means to have access to these things. It's hard, I think, especially because for a lot of parents, there's already so much to do, right? And so this adds that other layer of like taking that time. But we'll make sure to share resources with everybody about like where you can go, right, to do that, to get some of this information, and to kind of continue that conversation, not just when they're in high school, but starting them at a really young age to help them understand the importance of it. Next slide. Here we have another video. I'm not sure if this will play on this platform, but another short video of just an example of what a recruitment looks like and what some of the conversations online can look like. If not, I can always drop this in the chat if it's not gonna play it. Yeah. Okay, we'll go ahead and skip it for now, and I'll make sure to share that on the chat. Um, Here's another example of some of these social media apps called vaults or slash calculator. There's all different kinds of vault apps that I came across in doing some research. This is just one of those examples. Really what this is it looks like a calculator app. So the icon on the phone would look like a calculator, but when you click on it, it's actually a vault to store videos, pictures, conversations, or other data that people don't want people finding on their phone, right? And so again, this is stuff that easily available, can be downloaded on iPhones, can be downloaded on Androids. And again, probably not intended for children to use, but again, as we know, kids are very savvy with technology. And inevitably, they end up maybe coming across some of this stuff, having it on their phones as a means to maybe hide some of that content from their families, right? Again, something super important for parents and just caregivers to be aware of. But again, us as advocates too, right? And like having conversations of like, how do we make sure that these type of apps don't end up around our kids? And then also making sure that we advocate for some of these app companies, right, to make changes to how they market some of this stuff as well. Next slide. So I want to just share some couple of resources. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I also believe my time is up. Next slide. And I know that we have a keynote speaker from NCMEC, but I did want to go ahead and share like just some of the information that you can find on their website. We do have the QR code there that you can scan, and it'll take you to some more of the topics that we just covered here in regards to like online safety and social media. Again, super important for us to just have these conversations with our kids, right? Whether you're a parent or not, whether you're a teacher, you're out in the community, or you work with youth in a different capacity. These are just some of the things that we want to, do a little bit more research on. Again, great resource. You'll hear more about NCMEC, but these are just some of the topics that we have come across in some of the research. We do a lot of outreach out in the community where we talk to our kids about social media. We ask them, hey, what social media apps are you guys using? And they will throw out all kinds of stuff. By the time I'm out there presenting with my information and my information on what social media apps are popular, they're already telling me, oh, miss, we don't even use that anymore. This is what we're using, right? And so we learn a lot from them as well. And we want to make sure to use that too, right? And to have that conversation going with our youth. But these, again, are just some of the resources that we have used in our outreach, and we find it to be very, very effective. Next slide, please. And so we also want to make sure to share the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. Great resource to have. This is in the event that anyone should come across any situation where they think someone is being trafficked, or if somebody actually discloses that they have been trafficked or exploited. Again, you can use this number anonymously. And just be prepared to answer a couple of questions about what it is that you saw or who is the individual that has disclosed it, right? What this number does is they will connect to a local agency in your area that's in network with the hotline in order for that individual to receive services. But then they will also connect it to law enforcement, right? If there's enough there for them to dispatch either some of the local agents, if it's something more severe where we do need to involve partners like Homeland Security or FBI, then the National Human Trafficking Hotline will go ahead and do that. So again, another great resource to have, and just something that we definitely want to share with everyone so that they have this information. Next slide, please. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I was going to share a few questions from the Q&A box. So our first question is if there are certain tattoos that are indicative of a trafficking victim. I think this person.
Sorry, Caroline, Your sound went out.
Oh no. Still a
I don't know
problem?
if it's just on my end.
We're hearing you loud and clear over here. Caroline, do you want to try one more
Oh,
time?
okay. Okay. I was asking if there were certain tattoos that are indicative of a trafficking victim. I believe this question is coming from someone in the healthcare industry.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I know I shared in that slide some of the red flags. There was some examples on there. Obviously, tattoos are very common now, right? And so it can be a little hard to discern. Typically, what we have seen is the initials of the trafficker, usually on the neck, or their full name or their street name, with like that crown on it, money signs. A lot of times, some of these tattoos are also indicative of some kind of gang involvement, not all the time, right? But typically, if we see something that looks like that with like the initials or like a street name of someone, that's when we can kind of ask questions. And usually, at least in my case, our survivors have been pretty open about it, where they'll tell us like, "Oh, that's the name of my pimp, or that's the name of like my partner, or however they identify their trafficker." Um, and so yeah, like there's different things. Usually, it's pretty visible. I feel like most of the times I've seen that kind of stuff like written on the neck, right here, like on the face somewhere. Um, and yeah, it's usually like a mixture of like the trafficker's name with some kind of like moniker on it. But again, it's the trends also tend to change. So I typically just I typically try and ask anyone about their tattoos because I feel like typically that's something that's usually a story behind it. I think for anyone who has a tattoo, they typically like to share that. And so just asking, right, might give you a little bit more information about it. But
Yeah,
that's
and
a
a
good
good way
question.
of establishing rapport. Thank you. And then we have another question, and then I have a question. So this attendee asked, how can I approach and talk to someone I suspect is being trafficked without putting them at further risk? And I think you kind of got into that, but if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the main thing to keep in mind too is that a lot of times an individual might not know that they're being trafficked or might not identify as a victim of trafficking. But again, just kind of being open with them about it and approaching it maybe from more of like a safety stance too, right? Of like, yeah, like I just want to make sure that you're good, that you're safe, that everything's okay. That individual may or may not identify as a victim, right? And so they might respond, yes, actually, I do need help and I do want to get connected to law enforcement. You might get the opposite response where they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Nothing's wrong, right? And that can be very difficult. But for us, it's also important to recognize that we want to make sure that that individual has that autonomy, right? And this is again, especially this is an adult, right? It's different when it comes to kids. Um, but also that we're also not placing them in further risk by asking or inquiring, right? Especially if maybe you're in a hospital setting and then maybe the trafficker is there with them, right? Finding like a way to separate them, right? And I think, especially in a medical setting, I think you have a little bit of that power to be able to say, like, hey, you know what? I really need to talk to the patient by themselves, right? And being able to separate them in that way. When it comes to kids, right, it's very different because we are obligated to report, right? And so making sure that you just also have that communication with that youth, and say, you know what, like I know that you maybe don't want to talk about it, and I know that it was very hard to share. And I appreciate you for telling me that, but I really need to make sure that we report this and that this gets to like the proper individual so they can look into it.
Yeah, one thing I did just want to mention is that if you are approaching someone, to Jasmine's point, and they're with their trafficker, there is a decent chance that, you know, they might be in a relationship with their trafficker, they might be in love with their trafficker, and that might actually result in some sort of interpersonal violence after you leave. So I think that there's just a lot of caution. And in fact, I think it's best practice to avoid approaching someone with their trafficker, knowing that you could be actually putting them at more risk. afterwards. One last question for you, and then we will transition over to the panel. What kind of, and I know it's probably always changing, but are there ways of talking about social media that you feel like have been really successful with your young clients? Because it's very easy, right, to sort of like get the eye roll, but are there, concerns that they're feeling too, or something that like maybe they're getting curious about pulling back from technology? What has kind of been more successful in opening those lines of
Yeah. Yeah, good question. I talked about it a little bit, but usually when we go out, like in a classroom setting, I feel like it's always easier for me to ask them, like, hey, you teach me what social media you're using, right? And so I feel like that kind of empowers them a little bit to be, again, like have that teaching moment of like, oh, I'm telling you, the adult, right? Like what's in and what isn't. I feel like that tends to be more successful, where I can walk in and be like, oh, like Roblox, what is that? I have no idea what that is. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, miss, you don't know what that is? And they'll just give me like all of the details about what that is. Um, so yeah, I think that's like one avenue I really like to use, because I feel like that's when I get so much more information about what they're using, right? Um, I feel like it's rare that kids don't want to talk about social media, even if there has been a disclosure of something happening, they'll typically be the ones to tell us like, well, the conversation started on Snapchat and then we moved to like this other platform, or the conversation started on Tinder and then they convinced me to move to like this private chat or whatever. And so I feel like for the most part, again, because they're so connected and this is so much a part of like our kids' lives now, like I said, I don't think, there's a 14, 15-year-old that hasn't grown up with the stuff around them. And so I think it's a very natural thing and something that they're very much used to having, again, at the palm of their hand, right, with our phones. And so I think it's something that they're very readily to talk about it, or they're like wanting to engage in conversations about it sometimes. I don't think I've had issue with them wanting to, typically, at least not in my experience.
Well, thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful to see those real world examples. And thank you for the information. We're going to dive into our expert panel discussion now, the role of social media and exploitation. So we will talk about tactics used in online grooming, the risks of sextortion, how young boys can be manipulated in becoming future buyers, and then also some of the additional impacts that social media have on mental health for our children, as well as some of the law enforcement and policy decisions that we can make that will support our children and keep them safe. So honored to have this incredible panel of experts. I first want to introduce Nicole Schiff, Paso del Norte Center of Hope. She's the executive director. Victoria Sinis, she is the founder of Creating Gems. And then Officer Corey Wright with Fort Worth Internet Crimes Against Children. Take it away, Nicole.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Caroline, and a great presentation by Jasmine, who's actually my colleague in El Paso. And so thank you, Ms. Victoria and Officer Corey Wright, both for being here and being willing to answer some questions that I have. I'll try to directly ask you each, but then if the other wants to chime in, please feel free. The first one I'm going to go with is Officer Wright. I was hoping you could talk to us a little bit from your experience, how technology, specifically obviously AI and social media, has changed some of the tactics that you've seen that traffickers are using now to target or exploit the youth. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so these days, a lot of it's starting in like video games like Roblox and on video game platforms that have social media aspects like Discord. And so the kids are playing the games, the kids are chatting on Discord, kids are chatting on Roblox while playing the games. And a lot of that, we've had a lot of cases that have started just from that, and then have moved onto other platforms just for anonymity. So that's kind of what we're seeing right now is the tactics that a lot of these child predators are using.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Especially Jasmine had presented about that, the different apps, and we specifically saw that Roblox was one of them. I know for me, I don't have children, but I have nieces and nephews who are small and young, and Roblox was definitely directed more towards really young youth. So to hear that predators are trying to engage with youth, at that level or that age is really concerning. Victoria, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that still one of the most common ways that I guess young girls are being targeted is actually just through Instagram and TikTok. For a little bit of context for, I guess, people here, I actually used to do that. I used to recruit girls for OnlyFans. And what we had noticed as a trend in pornography at the time is that fresh teen, teen, and barely legal were the most top search categories in porn. So the girls at our agency that would earn the most money would actually be the girls that we would promote as being fresh teen. So what we would do when I actually just sent a screenshot, which everyone I think will get as an email, is our direct recruitment message that we would send to girls. And we would actually look for girls that looked young on social media. So I still think that TikTok and Instagram are the two most prominent ways that people are being recruited to do any type of, I guess, sex work.
Yeah, I think Instagram for sure. We hear it from all of our clients. We were actually just joking as a group that Facebook is old school. It's like MySpace now, but you have to
It
be on
kind of is.
Instagram. You have to be on Instagram if you want to be cool. So we have definitely seen so many messages and recruitment tactics coming out of Instagram for sure.
Mm.
Okay, and then I'll go back to you, Officer Wright. Have you seen a lot of leveraging with AI in the work that you're doing so far?
Yeah, so what we see it a lot in the sextortion type cases that we get, that these adults are creating these online personas um, of being a usually teenage girl and targeting teenage males to send them their content and then turn it around on them, threatening to release it to other people that they know, and in exchange, for money to prevent them from doing that. So this is where we see a lot of the AI being used in this aspect. We've seen some as far as creating the actual content, not as much as I think we're going to be seeing in come to the future, but that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, thank you. And I think to be mindful, like you said, that boys are very much involved. I know from our perspective at doing direct services, a lot of times everyone assumes it's only females. But especially through video game chats, we've seen a lot of engagement with young males, 14 and 15-year-old males who, like you said, are being sextorted, or they're threatening, if you don't pay me or do what I want, I'll tell everyone that you're gay, or your friends will assume you're gay. And so I know at a national level that's created some issues around teen suicide as well, just because of that idea of, well, I can't pay them, or I can't give them what they want, and yet like I also can't have my family and friends thinking that I'm gay. So that's certainly been a challenge that we've seen and heard. Victoria, did you have anything to add to that one?
I think on a more ground level, something that I see when I go into schools, so I guess it's more of a cultural conversation, is the fact that a lot of young boys are using AI to be able to create porn of their female classmates. So that's a huge issue that we kind of hear and that we see quite often. But from the other perspective that we're talking about, I don't really have any experience in that, no.
And then I'm going to ask you this question, Victoria. Since you mentioned going into the schools and obviously working directly with the youth, how would you say that youth can be empowered to recognize and to resist the online grooming tactics, especially since you mentioned that you used to actually be one of the ones to send out, the recruitments? Like, how can they avoid that?
Yeah, one of the most powerful things I think when I talk to young people is actually getting them to understand that it's not real. And I know that sounds really weird, but whenever I go and I actually talk about the inner workings of an OnlyFans agency and how we would ask girls to create like 3 to 5 TikTok accounts and have 20 different videos, and we have these very specific curated things. And the main feedback I get from kids is like, oh, so it's not real. Like they don't actually want to do this. And I think that's something that's really important, is to actually shatter that illusion. I think that kids still have like a little bit of an ego. And so they're like, wait a minute, like they're not doing this because they want, like necessarily they want to do it, but these people are being manipulated as well. And then they go, wait a minute, I kind of want to reject that. Like it's been really cool going into schools and even having kids, I be able to identify this and be like, wait a minute, that influencer that I love, I can now identify that these are the things that they post. They reject it. And then you kind of have to feed them like this word of countercultural. And so how do you then be countercultural and to be able to identify this and then go, I actually don't want to be a part of that. And so I think that for me, anyways, the most powerful or impactful thing is actually getting them to understand the machine that's behind it. So then they can then go, that's kind of honestly really lame. And then they reject it. And that just, yeah, is one of the most impactful things I personally see.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's great. Officer Wright, did you have anything to add to that one? Question about empowering youth.
No, just really education, like understanding the ramifications of where this leads down the road. You post something up now, you send something to someone, that's not necessarily ever going to disappear. It is going to be out there forever. And we've had cases where stuff from girls in their 20s has cropped back up from when they were in their teens of stuff they sent out to people. And they're on their careers now. And this is very detrimental, if these people are sending it to their colleagues that they work with and stuff like that. So and I know it can be hard to grasp as a teenager that, 10 years from now, this may affect you, but getting them to at least start to understand that the internet, that things will and can exist forever on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talk to youth about that a lot too. And just, even if sometimes I think they think if they're in a relationship, even if it's with, youth their age, that sharing this different photos or videos won't, backfire basically. But what happens when you break up? And we've seen that. And then especially with some of the younger girls we've worked with, having that older boyfriend, like you mentioned, Victoria, that attention, and them thinking like, well, no, they love me. And how do you explain to them that that's not what love is, or that that's not, safe for them, what they're being asked to do? So I think that's really good, helpful. From your role, Officer Wright, do you think there's any responsibilities or changes that could be made to hold the platforms accountable more? I know Caroline mentioned the different House bills and stuff that are pending. But do you have any like suggestions from your perspective?
Yeah, the platforms could do a better job as far as when talking about access to their own personal information. There's some platforms that do a good job where you can go in and on consent, we can get the access to that child's account and go in and get the information, the data that's in there to go ahead and move forward with a case. But other platforms don't do as good of a job. It makes it very difficult to access that information. They don't care about consent. Their view is, well, this is the child's account. Well, no, the parents have the say when it comes to the child's account. The child doesn't get to make their own decisions when it comes to their online account. So there's some platforms that have a very different opinion as when it comes to, the parent's role in their child's activity online.
Yeah, great, awesome. And I'm curious your thoughts on that pending House bill where it would make it that you have to be 18 or older to even have a social media account. Do you see that being an effective means of, I guess, controlling like how much youth are on social media? My thought would be that youth typically, like, how would they verify that they're over 18, and how would that work for all apps? Because we know we have youth on apps already, like dating apps, where you do have to be over 18 and they're still getting on these apps. So do you see that being an effective means?
I'm sorry, my audio cut out on part of your question.
Sorry. So
my
the
phone
question would
rang
be
and then it went through my headphones. I apologize.
That's okay. The question would be if the bill was passed that youth have to be over the age of 18 to have social media accounts. Do you see that being an effective means of controlling some of this?
I would be interested to see how that would be, one, enforced, and two, um, some parents allow their children to just get in and do whatever. They'll create an account for their child. Okay, well, now we got this account that the parent created, and the child has free reign at that point, because typically there's a lot less restrictions on adult accounts in social media apps than there are on children's accounts. So I I don't know. We can see how it would possibly be into effect, but um, I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I said in terms of, and I don't know if you caught that part about like there already is some dating apps and stuff where you have to be over 18, but the youth obviously, are faking the date of birth or the verification process. And so how do we manage that? Victoria, I don't know if you want to speak to that question as well, especially with working with the youth directly.
Yeah, definitely. I don't personally think that it's a social media problem. I think it's a cultural problem. So if you still have an 18-year-old that's never been exposed to social media, they don't know how to navigate it, they don't have the tools. So they're going to jump on at 18 years old and still have the exact same issues as a 16-year-old. They're still going to be bombarded with hypersexualized content. They're still going to be enticed to, in LA right now, one of the biggest things is the bop house and young girls all wanting to join the bop house and seeing the lifestyle and all these things. So I don't necessarily think that restricting the age in which people are exposed to this is the solution. I think that it's being able to be, honestly, yeah, just countercultural and being able to educate kids and get them to understand that, these lifestyles, the things that are so idolized on social media, the things that are promoted is not the path. Because that's huge in the culture right now is young girls are idolizing, wanting to be OnlyFans girls, are wanting to be sex workers. I know in Australia, our biggest influences are, sex workers and all these type of things. So I think that there's a cultural issue here. And then through that education as well, it's also getting people to identify and understand, hey, there are predators online. You do have to navigate these things and actually having real and raw and open conversations with kids. Not just trying to, I guess, protect them and then think when they're 18 that they'll know what to do. So yeah, I think that it's more so about that education piece than kind of mitigating. Honestly, I assume the inevitable because when they go online at 18, they're going to be exposed to all this anyways.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. And I think, and somebody asked earlier, and Officer Wright, you put it in the chat, the different resources like for parents, which is through NCMEC. And then also, I know we work closely with Love 146. I'm not sure if either of you worked with them or are familiar. They have a curriculum as well for youth. But I think it's educating the youth and the parents because sometimes parents, I think, assume, like you said, Officer Wright, they're creating the accounts for their children, not thinking anything of it. Oh, it's fine. And even like YouTube, I've seen that, they're engaging, like watching videos on their tablets at 5 years old and not really thinking anything of it, but the algorithm can change for sure. And so I think it's really important that we're educating not only the youth to be empowered, but also the parents.
Yeah, absolutely. The parents have to take a major role in what's going on with their children. And you think back, I'm 40. When I was growing up, we were running around outside in the neighborhood playing with kids. My parents still knew where I was at. I was at so-and-so's house. I was over here. I went to the movies with whoever, right? My parents knew where I was at, what I was doing, even though I wasn't at home. Same thing has to play on the internet. You need to know what your kids are doing, where they're at on the internet, who they're talking to, who they're hanging out with. It's no different than what our parents had to do when we were growing up to protect us, make sure we weren't hanging out with people we weren't supposed to, make sure we weren't doing things they weren't supposed to. Still have to be parents. The parents still have to be parents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I know I've seen it, and maybe either of you can speak to this, the parents that are like, no, my child just won't have a cell phone or they won't have social media. But we found where they'll go to school, they'll find a way, they'll be, at a friend's house and they'll be using their phone to communicate. And so I don't think like that, absences of, no cell phone or no social media. And like you just said too, Victoria, that when they turn 18, all of a sudden it's still going to be a culture shock then if they've not been exposed to it. And so it's allowing them and letting them be exposed, but in a safe way. Like you said, Officer Wright, like knowing what apps they're on, what they're doing, and actually having that conversation. not just assuming it won't be my child or it's not my child. Because I do think that also, if it were to happen to the youth, creates some level of for them, like a stigma of not wanting to talk to the parents about it because they think they did something wrong or they're going to be in trouble. I don't know if you've had experience with that in any of the cases you've worked, Officer Wright, where the youth are worried about letting a parent know or letting a trusted adult know when it actually does happen.
Right. Definitely hesitant as far as what they're willing to talk to mom and dad about versus maybe what they're willing to tell us in a forensic interview, something along those lines. Concerned about, oh, you're going to see the stuff that's on my phone. Like, I'm not sure I want to give you the password to that. I mean, honestly, that shouldn't even be a thing. The parents should know what the password is to their child's phone. It shouldn't be oh, I don't know we're going to have to ask, my daughter what her password is. Well, we've already, if you're already at that point where you're having to ask your kid what the password is for their phone, something has already gone wrong previous to that. So yeah, no, but like I said, they are being exploited online. It's not necessarily that they're just coming out and they're created this behavior by themselves. They're being groomed. They're being introduced to this content. Like Victoria said, it's it's sexualized, right? And so it's not necessarily that, and they need to understand it's not necessarily that they're doing anything wrong. That there are people out there who will exploit them, and they'll do it. They'll be exploiting multiple children at the same time. It's not even just usually one; it is multiple. Yeah.
And I think that's a piece. Thank you. That's a piece. The education piece for parents is that it is not that your youth did anything wrong, or that your child did this on purpose or because of anything that they posted. It is because of the predator. It's because they're being groomed or exploited or somebody's coming for them. It could be nothing. It could have nothing to do with anything they've done or anything they've been on. So I think that's a piece for the parents to understand that and to not be so punitive or, you're losing your phone, you're grounded, we're taking your phone away, because I think that really, impacts their level of trust and who they're going to reach out to if and when something like this happens. And I'll go to you, Victoria, because you were shaking your head. I'm curious your thought on that.
Yeah, I work for a non-for-profit back home, and that's when I go into schools with. And we actually do parent workshops. And one of the things I was just thinking of, which I think is such an excellent tool that they use, is we call it shark music. And so the Jaws theme song. And so when we train, or I guess do our workshops with parents, we say that basically there's going to be times in your life with your child that your shark music is going to play. So perhaps it's when, your child asks, hey, where do babies come from? And your shark music goes off. And so it's these very simple things. And it's about how do you navigate that when your shark music goes off. So it is about kind of educating parents that maybe you do catch your child and they're, watching pornography, or you get, you find out that they do have naked photos on their phone or whatever it is. It's not letting that shark music go off, because that's more damaging to the child, because then it shames them. And so then they're going to be like, oh, there's something wrong with what I've done. Well, I'm not going to come to them now. And then it goes into the shadows. Or if there is, unsafe people that is communicating with them, if they think that their parents aren't safe people to talk to this about because they're just going to get in trouble, then I think that really is a piece that's really significant for parents to understand the tools that they need to use to be able to navigate these conversations, because it is inevitable. I think in Australia, the average age of pornography exposure is like 8 years old. So it's like we have to learn how to talk to our children about good pictures, bad pictures, things that make you feel safe, things that make you feel unsafe. So yeah, I'm very passionate about that and that education piece, because I think we could prevent a lot of unnecessary things for our kids if our parents knew how to navigate their shark music, basically.
I love that so much. Can we steal that? And when we do presentations for parents, can we use shock music? I
Yes,
just love that.
absolutely.
I'll have to talk to our team. That is a great advice.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're spot on. Like, it's just like when they ask, like, where do babies come from? It's just having that really hard conversation. And unfortunately, the age at which you need to do it, I think, just keeps getting younger and younger. We use the NCMEC material, and we'll go into elementary schools, and people are like, why would you be going into an elementary school, to talk about exploitation or trafficking? And how are you even having that conversation? And I think it's about, like, talking about, like you said, safe pictures versus unsafe, healthy relationships. Like we've even talked to them about like what's good touch versus bad, hugging, handshake, stuff like that. Like it's just as simple as starting those conversations as early as possible. I'm going to go really quick to practical tools. And so, have you either of you seen any tools or apps that families or community could use to monitor or protect the youth? Like any type of parental controls, maybe from your end, Officer Wright, that you recommend?
I think one thing that's important is just not allowing children to have unfettered access to everything on the internet, be able to talk to anyone they want to on the phone at any given point in time, being able to text message anyone they want to at any point in time, at any hour of the day too. So these considerations have to be considered because if your kid goes to bed with their phone, what are they doing? What are they doing with that phone? Just like I'll segue back to the analogy that I made when I was growing up and playing. There was a limit to when you had to come back home, and it's time to come back home. Well, there needs to be a limit to when that internet activity stops. Some point in the night, whatever that point is, 9 o'clock maybe, I don't know, but you need to say, okay, let's go ahead and let's pack the phone away for the night. You don't need it. You're going to bed. There's no reason why you need to have your phone in your room unsupervised, and with access to anything that you need on it. So just putting restrictions as a parent on what there's up there. There are apps that you can monitor and stuff like that on there, and that's fine. I mean, it's good to know what's going on, but the communication and being the parent and setting those boundaries with your children is going to go a long ways in preventing this type of exploitation that happens, because the predators want to have that access, without the parents, want to have the access at night. We've had cases where they've left the phone on all night with the adult and basically slept, with the phone on all night. And it's alarming that the kid would even have that going on. So
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that you compare it to prior. When I say we were younger, I think we're close in age. You said 40. So I'll go back to when my dad would always say, no boys in your room. Like you can't be alone in your room. So to me, what's the difference between, physically being there alone and then having your phone? And I see so many youth will, lock themselves in their rooms or close the door. And, those photos and videos, like you said, actually are, I think, more detrimental when they're sent out than if you actually physically had someone in your room back in the day, because nothing was posted online, no videos were taken. And so, yeah, to be mindful of that same parenting technique, that you really just shouldn't be alone with that access, I think is so important. And Victoria, do you want to speak to that, the practical tools or apps that families or the community can be using?
To be honest, I just couldn't agree anymore. I think it's setting those really healthy boundaries. Phones are things that we just have to navigate and learn to live with. So yeah, just those simple things of sitting down with your child and having those conversations about, we don't have our phone in the bedroom and here's why. Don't take it into the bathroom. Don't take it into the toilet. Those critical places where things can kind of get a little bit messy. And then just explaining why, I think, and being open and honest. And not thinking that that's a negative, to actually just be truthful with your child. So again, kind of exactly what was said. I just think it's about parenting and putting in those really healthy boundaries around technology.
So I do want to play devil's advocate now real quick. This is a little off script, but we're talking, what I see in terms of the trend that we're talking about, and I'm in complete agreement, is that parents have to really educate their youth and set those boundaries. What about the kids that don't have supportive parents at home, or parents are working? Whose job do you think it is to help? Is it educators, our community? When the kids are out, I know Jasmine mentioned survival sex in her presentation. When they're out and they're homeless or they got kicked out of their home, what do we do at that point? Does the community get involved? Is it the teacher's job to help there? What are your thoughts on that? I'm just curious. Either
I'll
of
let
you.
Claire go first if he has anything.
well, that's tough, right? You're talking about there is basically no supervision. Like there's no one that's possibly consistently involved in that child's life. So you look at the things. What's the most concerning parts of the aspects of that child? maybe if someone can get that child into a steady therapist or a counselor, someone that they can confide in on a regular basis, the issues that are going on with them, maybe some of these things can get flushed out. Um, Obviously, there's resources that have to be provided, for the children. But if you're talking about homeless youth, I mean, you're talking about need for food, need for shelter, need for all sorts of things. Obviously, being exploited online is also a concern, but a multitude of concerns across the board for these youth.
Hmm. Oh, I think you're muted.
I apologize. I don't know how I got muted. I was gonna say if you have anything to add to that, just in terms of, and I'm sorry for putting you both on the spot with that question, but just curious. I think it increases the level of vulnerability when they don't have the parental figure, and just curious who else should be involved or be able to help them.
I kind of see that as a beautiful opportunity because every single child you would assume has a phone, has some sort of social media. And so it's like, well, then use social media, use that tool. And it's like every single person that's in here, every single church, non-for-profit, countercultural voice, person that, really wants to align with helping and protect children, then use social media and be as loud as you possibly can. Put as much free resources as you can, do as many videos, do as many TikToks, YouTubes, Instagrams, whatever it is. Because if we have like, I guess, an army of people that are trying to exploit kids online, why can't we combat that with an army of people that are putting out a different message? And like, I just think that the more that we can show up online, the more we can give alternative options, alternative resources, make it free, make it easily accessible, make it, relevant to kids in whatever capacity that is, keeping up with trends, honestly. Algorithms do change. All you need is one video to go viral and millions of people could see it. And you never know that maybe that's that one child that's hearing you talk about maybe your story or something like that. And then you've got, hey, in the link, you can get help here. And then they just need to click that link. So I think that's a really simple and practical thing that every single person can do to be able to just show up online every single day consistently, honestly. And you never know what child will stumble across that video or that post.
Yeah, I love that so much. Our team has talked a lot about that, putting out flyers or, even website posts, like that's not a thing anymore. That's not what is going to get to our youth. And so I think that's such a great example of, like you said, an army of people trying to advocate and support and getting creative and going to where the youth are, which is social media. And so putting out those lives or videos or content that maybe they'll see, hopefully. And I do agree, even when a youth is homeless and on the street, it's so sometimes crazy to me how they still have that phone or access to social media because to them that's a priority. That's like a basic need, I think, at this point, as much as food or shelter is to be on social media. And so how do we meet them where they are and really go to them? And I think that's something we all have to like get used to, especially as we get older and I can't keep up with the trends. I still have Facebook. I thought I was cool, but apparently I'm not at all. I'm behind the times. But so yeah, I think that's an absolutely great option. So I'm going to go to the call to action now, which I think that's certainly what you just mentioned. But if either of you, what attendees today could do to help protect our youth from exploitation? So whether it be parents, advocates, educators, and even policymakers, what would each of you, I'll go to you first, Officer Wright, what would you say to those listening today as a final kind of call to action to help?
So as far as parents go, just monitoring what their children are doing and having those conversations and setting those boundaries with them about their activity, what games they're playing, who they're talking to, where they're at, where they're going, everything like that. Just like you would in real life with your kids, you would have that conversation. You need to have that conversation about what they're doing online. As far as like policymakers and stuff, I think new policies, obviously, to enforce laws on things that really aren't addressed are good, but with that needs to come funding for law enforcement agencies to be able to actually provide the manpower for enforcement. At least in the internet crimes against children world, we're swamped. Like there is more cases vastly than we're ever going to be able to deal with. we basically have to take a triage type approach to it. Like, okay, where do we think that there are live children at risk the most? That's our top priority, and we work down from there. But there's no way that law enforcement can handle the amount of cases and traffic that's coming in through cyber tips, different referrals from different agencies, cases that come in just locally here. So funding for law enforcement to actually be able to enforce these laws would be a huge advantage for us. Yeah.
No, I love that. Thank you. And obviously, I'm in the nonprofit sector, and so are you, Victoria. I would say absolutely. We work really closely with our law enforcement partners in El Paso, Texas, and we have a wait list for victims right now. And so to me, that's really hard to have a youth who needs services and we have to put them on a wait list because we just don't have enough case managers to man these cases. And we do the same thing, like you said, it's basically triage. Are they in immediate danger? Maybe they're at juvenile probation. So we know they're somewhere safe. They don't even have access to their phone there. So like they can, quote unquote, wait a little while before we get to them, before we can assist them. But that to me is just so disheartening. And so more funding, the more laws we put out, the more support that I think we all need doing this work. To, like you said, boots on the ground, manpower, being able to actually answer to this call, I think is huge. And so I fully support that and the work that you all are doing. And then Victoria, did you, same thing, want to just today, what would be the call to action for those listening? What do you recommend?
Honestly, I guess kind of what I said before. I think that one of the best ways that we can help protect children and educate them is to show up where they're at, and every child is basically online at the moment. So taking that serious, I know a lot of people have resistance towards like TikTok and think that it's lame, but that's where all the kids are. That's where kids are getting groomed. And so I think that just being really proactive in that and just wanting to go full steam ahead and be unashamed and wanting to create, yeah, honestly, like a revolution and countercultural voices that are mainstream on social media, I think would be really impactful. So that would just be my call to action is, yeah, start posting.
Awesome. I love that. And we'll leave a couple minutes, obviously, for questions. And so thank you both. I just really appreciate it. Officer Wright, you and I can start looking for more funding for boots on the ground. And then with Victoria, I'm going to steal the Jaws song and start using it in presentations. And then, yeah, if we can just all get online and start meeting youth where they are. Thank you both just for going off script with me, answering additional questions that probably you weren't sent, and just being willing to talk about this. I think Caroline will open it up now for questions for us.
Yes. So there were a few questions in the chat. One was about have you guys seen children or adults with disabilities exploited more often?
No, I haven't had an experience with that.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like that their autistic children are more vulnerable as far as what they're more willing to do online than maybe some other children. And I've had several cases involving some autistic victims that it seems that they were able to make that connection online maybe better than they would be able to in person. So
It makes sense.
and a lot of heavy involvement online with their activities, just very socially withdrawn in person, but their communications online, you wouldn't know that.
And then there was also a question around you guys talked about some of the young people who may be homeless or without resources. What kind of outreach or support could someone try to offer that person? What kind of resources could they call? I think of maybe 211. Any suggestions on who to call if you see a young person on the streets looking like they're in trouble?
I unfortunately wouldn't know any in America. Sorry. So again, Corey, that might be a question for you.
Yeah, I mean, your local police department, would be probably a good start. They're going to have the most immediate response to that type of activity. Outside of that, I don't delve too much directly into the human trafficking realm, just mostly the internet crimes against children. So as far as in-person type trafficking like that, I couldn't say from too much experience in that area, but probably a good start would be your local law enforcement.
Yeah, I'll chime in a little bit just from the direct service aspect. Definitely, I think local law enforcement for sure. Although I know with our experience, we've had trouble that we don't want the youth to end up in trouble or arrested or, end up at juvenile probation. So we're a little hesitant sometimes. I do think the National Human Trafficking Hotline could certainly help, though, if they were to call, even though they can't confirm that the youth was exploited or trafficked, but at least the hotline can get some local resources. Maybe there's a drop-in center locally that the youth could end up at. I know El Paso has a drop-in center for youth. And so the National Human Trafficking Hotline could advise that person, hey, maybe let the youth know they could go here. And I do think, obviously, Child Protective Services just has to get involved more with the homeless youth population and why they're homeless. Where are their parents or where are their guardians? And so maybe even calling local CPS if need be.
Yeah, I think those drop-in centers are a fantastic resource. I know we have the Landing in Houston. I believe Unbound has a drop-in center in Fort Worth. They're across Texas. So if that is something that you're seeing, and you could do a quick Google of your particular location and what kind of drop-in centers might be available to that youth. And then I had a question because I think that in general, we talk a lot and the general public is very aware of the objectification of girls and guarding against that. But I think that there's also been this sort of grooming of young men into potentially becoming buyers or consumers of commercial sex. And so I was wondering if any of you on this panel had a thought about how to talk to young men about what they're seeing online as well. Of course, they can be victims, but also, they might be sort of being groomed into seeing women as objects or seeing sex as transactional. And so what can we do to sort of guard against that?
Yeah, I know for me personally, we had actually hired an expert when I worked at the OnlyFans agency, and their role was to basically study trends, algorithms, all these different things to get the girls to make very specific, the OnlyFans girls to make very specific, provocative, curated content. And the whole point of that was to target young men. It's to manipulate the algorithm so then they can see it. It's very suggestive, it's very cheeky, and so it sparks curiosity within them to go, oh, wait a minute, what is that? And then before you know it, they're on a porn platform. And then you train these things called chatters in the girlfriend experience to be able to continue to entice men to come and consume porn, to stay buying porn, all to be able to basically get money out of them. And so there's a whole very intentional I guess, ecosystem that exists, especially in OnlyFans, to target men, to get them to consume porn, to get them to believe that these are desirable women, and then to continue to build relationships with them, to have them continuing to consume pornography. And then, of course, from there, the men want to meet up with these girls. If they're escorts, if they do things like that, then it kind of can spiral out into those type of situations as well. So I think that that's maybe perhaps like a bigger conversation. But I know from personal experience that, of course, young men are specifically targeted through social media and then on the OnlyFans platform through these things called chatters that are trained basically to keep men thinking that they have relationships with girls.
There was another question in the chat around organized criminal networks. Officer Corey, could you speak to that?
Yeah, so not specifically as you would think of an organized criminal network, but what we've had a lot of activity recently, especially in our area, and you've seen it all online, is vigilante activity, where people are going out, they're creating these chats with these people who may or may not actually think that they're talking with someone who is pretending to be a kid, going out, meeting them, assaulting them, pointing guns at them, doing all sorts of things. As far as the ICAC task force goes, we're not actually allowed to work with these vigilante groups as far as take content from them, take their chats, and create a case out of it. They're not prosecutable. And so what it's actually doing is it's hurting our ability to actually do our job when we're trying to do the catch predators type stings in getting people to come in and try to meet us while we're pretending to be youth. And it's just making that part harder, because that's one of the proactive things that we can do on our end as far as help stem some of this activity on that end, where we can actually get them in and get good prosecution on these individuals. And some of these people are people who have been hiding with felony warrants for touching children who they haven't been able to been found. Lots of registered sex offenders we bring in, lots of people to that extent. So the vigilante activity is a detriment to the job that we're doing on our end, as interesting as the videos online may seem.
Thank you for that. Just a few points before we close out. In listening to you guys, one of the things that I thought was kind of a theme throughout was the potential loneliness and connection that our young people are seeking, and that we're all seeking, right? And so I think that offering ways for your child to have healthy connection points will kind of feed that longing that they potentially have. And then the other thing is just, I've been reading a book about parenting, and the basic idea is that we are so concerned about our children's physical safety out, away from us, and we're not nearly concerned enough for their safety online, which I think goes to the points that you guys have made so many times about kids aren't playing in the neighborhoods anymore, where we knew where they were. We have no idea. We feel like we can see them and hold them and that they're safe, but we have no idea where they're going online, and how scary that is and potentially detrimental. Thank you so much. I've received lots and lots of messages about how informative this panel was.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
thanks for having us.
Of course, of course. So with that, I am going to transition over to our keynote. So Jennifer Newman, the Executive Director of National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, is going to join us to talk about generative AI and other emerging technologies and their role in child sexual exploitation. She brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in addressing these growing concerns. And I am so excited for her to share with you some of the recent data and reports and more on these alarming trends. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting us. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Thumbs up that you can see it. We're good to go. Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you all. I know I'm kind of wrapping up this wonderful event, so appreciate you all sticking through the end. I was able to listen to that panel, which was absolutely fantastic. I agree, yes, to everything they said times 1,000. So always nice to see good alignment and support and just consistent messaging out there, especially for parents and members of the public when this can all be super overwhelming. So along those points, when we talk about the computer facilitated abuse and exploitation of children, we're going to kind of close today talking about generative AI technologies and that intersection with child sexual exploitation. So some of you might be familiar with the ChatGPT, probably is the one most people know. And really kind of these tools that are just coming out, they're constantly being iterated and changed and developed further and further to do more and more things for us. And again, there is absolutely a place for them. They make our lives faster, quicker. They make us sound better, be more succinct, all of those things. So there's absolutely a benefit to these technologies. But with every technology, even going back 20 years, every technology that has come out is absolutely used by offenders who hurt and exploit children to help them facilitate their abuse. And so this is definitely something that we are seeing at the National Center. Just a quick highlight on NCMEC is how I'll refer to it. We are a national NGO based here in the United States. I'm actually down in Austin, Texas. We have an office down here. We have other field offices in Lake Park, Florida, and up in Rochester, New York. And finally, our headquarters is in Old Town, Alexandria in Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary, so a 40th year anniversary. So we've been around since 1984 and really serve as the clearinghouse here in the United States on missing and exploited children issues. So kind of getting into the thick of it, when we talk about generative AI, child sexual abuse material, as you'll see CSAM there, which is maybe commonly known as child pornography, which is what we're trying to change. We actually have pending legislation to change that term from child pornography to child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, in the spirit of calling it what it is. So when you hear me say that, that's what I'm referring to. But we do believe at NCMEC that artificially created child sexual abuse material is child sexual abuse material. And this is where we are running into issues on prosecutorial fronts, on legislative fronts, ensuring that we have the infrastructure both with the laws and with statutes to basically prosecute these crimes and to respond to these crimes for what they are, which is the sexual abuse of children. And where this starts becoming kind of a blurry line is when you say, but there was no child victim. Like, if this is a completely artificially created picture, who is the victim in this case? At NCMEC, we believe it is child sexual abuse material because it is feeding that interest of the offender in that type of content, which we firmly believe then, if it is of interest, will lead to more collection of other imagery, whether images and videos of actual sexual abuse material, and or worst case, then moving on to an actual hands-on defense against a child. One of the common things about, that we hear from offenders is them really basically saying, well, I haven't hurt a child, right? That's their defenses. Well, show me the child that I hurt. There is no, it's a victimless crime, which we know is absolutely not the case. And it by default almost becomes a low barrier, a CSAM interest. They don't, for someone who may wonder if CSAM is of interest to them, they're not risking going out on the open web. They're not even having to go onto the dark net. They can actually create an image themselves and see if it's for them. So a lot of complicating factors when we talk about generative AI as it intersects with generative sexual exploitation. So at NCMEC, we operate the cyber tip line, which is the U.S. reporting mechanism for child sexual exploitation. The cyber tip line has been around since 1998, and last year we received 20.2 million cyber tip line reports. A majority of those are coming in from our electronic service providers. And so when you see here the number of reports that we've received, this is from 2023 through December of 2024. You can see that we received, around 70,000, a little over 70,000 reports related to generative AI. That means it was either used in the creation of the image, that it was used to manipulate imagery, which we'll talk a little bit about the different ways that the technology is leveraged for this. But we had over 70,000. What's significant about that is that over a 1,300% increase that we saw in the year prior. So what's really from 2023 to 2024, if you look at calendar year. And so what we're seeing is that this is on the rise. Again, this technology is still relatively new. It's still kind of coming out. People are getting more and more comfortable with it. There are more companies like this coming out. And again, it's technology based. So it's always evolving and it's always improving. Which again, for innocent uses or for more traditional uses, that's great. But again, as this develops, it becomes better, smarter, faster, all of those things. Unfortunately, it's also better, smarter, faster for abuse and harms against children. So what does it mean when we talk about how generative AI is used in child sexual exploitation? So let's first look at text-based. So I just open up a platform. I'm just going to pick ChatGPT because that's the one most people know, but there are several others out there. And there's a couple different ways we see that intersection. So text to chat. Entering text to get a chat model to pretend it's a child and engage in a sexually explicit chat. What that means is that we are seeing offenders use the chat to put in words to say, if I was a 14-year-old boy, how would I say this? Because what they are trying to do is use the technology to entice and to groom children online for sexual exploitation. And if you're thinking about a 55-year-old adult male, he probably does not know the vernacular, the slang, all the emoji use, all the ways that kids kind of speak these days on text is very different than how we speak, right? And so it would be pretty evident if he's trying to engage with a child online and he's using full sentences and full words and not dropping emojis everywhere and things like that. So they are using these technologies to unfortunately help them become better at faking out children and engaging with them to make them think they're actually talking to another child. Text to text. So this is going to be entering text to generate guides, tutorial suggestions on how to groom or sexually abuse children, right? So they're going to say, how can I, groom a 6-year-old to taking off her shirt? How can I convince an 8-year-old to do X, Y, and Z? So they're truly turning to this for a guide, for tutorials on how to harm children. And they are getting responses back on how to build trust in child, how to isolate children. And so again, we are just talking text-based. There's no even imagery yet this technology is being leveraged to harm children. And then finally, text to image. And this might be what you more traditionally think of, which is putting in word prompts to create an image. So I'd like to see, an 8-year-old girl sitting on her bed, ... And so they're able to basically describe an image and have that image created. Now, I will caveat that there are some companies that have started putting some bumpers around that, and they're not allowing certain sequence of words or words to be put into the text prompt to create an image. However, offenders are creative and they're finding ways around that. So for example, if I wanted an image of perhaps a child with maybe a bodily fluid, a sexual fluid on her face, I'm not allowed necessarily maybe to put that in verbatim, but I could say, show me a 6-year-old girl with vanilla yogurt on her face, which could then quickly be adapted and look like something else sexual. And so this is how we're seeing just text basically being used in child sexual exploitation. And then we have image-based harms. So the first one is altering known CSAM. So this is where the user actually uploads an image of CSAM to create new imagery. So whether that's adding on new abuses in the picture, so it's already CSAM, it's already an illegal abusive file, but they just want to elevate it. They want to add on another sexual element to that. They can do that using this tool. Another thing that they could also do is, say, for example, if I'm a preferential offender of boys, but I have a CSAM picture of a girl, I could go in and change the genitalia, and then I have a picture that I prefer more than the original. So that's what we call kind of altering known CSAM. And then what you all might be the most familiar with, which we're seeing a lot of, especially in schools these days, is altering innocuous images. And this is where pictures, whether the child sent them at that moment or have been posted to their social media for 2 years, they're innocent images, they're just normal images of children living their life. They are then taken by the offender, again, which could be a classmate, which we're seeing in many cases of this kind of peer abuse, or the offender themselves, and they are being digitally manipulated to be sexually exploitative. So say, for example, there's a picture of a 14-year-old girl at her family barbecue from 4 years ago on her social media, and someone took a picture because she's eating her hot dog and it was a funny picture. Imagine then someone taking that picture that this child doesn't even know, the child didn't send a picture to, it was just kind of sitting up there on her social media. That hot dog is replaced, with a penis or some other sort of, sexual inference. And now it really looks like that child was engaged in that activity. And the thing that's really important here is this technology is really good. I've been in this space for about 20 years, and way back in the day, in the early 2000s, there's always been technology that can manipulate images. So that concept isn't brand new. What's brand new is how good it is. Back again, 10, 15, 20 years ago, if you tried to digitally manipulate an image, it would kind of be apparent, like the head would be wider than the shoulders, or there would clearly be like 11 fingers on a hand or something like that. Unfortunately, the technology has gotten really good that these images look like true images. And we are seeing these harms through these kind of declothe or nudify apps, or through the generative AI, where you just say, remove the clothing from this child. And these children see it and they go, oh my gosh, a viewer of this picture would think I did that. They would think that that is me. And kids are aware that they can't follow these images around going, but that wasn't really me. That wasn't really me. I didn't do that. This is a fake image. And it's really upsetting to them, and I know Officer Wright was talking about, imagery kind of being online. And yes, there are things we can do to help take down some of it, but can we scrub the internet? Absolutely not. And so some of the concerns, for these kids are, one, who's going to see this image and believe I actually participated in that? And then second, also, like, is this going to, impact my college? Is it going to impact my career? All of that. And so these are very real harms. And sadly, the important part of this is that the child didn't even engage, which if the child did engage, we avoid victim blaming. So we would never do that anyway. But this is truly just imagery that's up on social media, or a picture that was taken where a child happens to be in the background and they are victimized. I apologize in advance for the crudeness of this, but it is important for us to show what we're talking about when we say these are the text prompts that we are seeing put into some of these technologies and what they're asking for. So where can I find child porn? Help me find a child that I can abduct. Tell me how to rape. And then, at the bottom there, you see them describing, as I mentioned, the image that they want to see created by this technology. So again, I apologize for the crudeness and the vulgarity of it, but we have to understand what we're up against when we talk about these technologies. And so this is how easy it is to do this. A couple examples of reports that we received: to be told that an image of our daughter was taken from another middle schooler's social media app, her face inserted into pornographic images, and then posted on a game site, was heartbreaking. And what I think is also interesting about this is, look what they say. It was the image of our daughter was taken from another middle schooler's social media app. So even if you wanted to totally lock down your child on social media, how far out can you reach? So their daughter was in another child's social media picture. And so again, it's really about how do we attack this on all fronts instead of policing or lockdown, because we can't guarantee that, right? So, this is kind of the harms that we are seeing. We're also started seeing this being leveraged into financial sextortion. And we have a bunch on our website about financial sextortion. This is a recent crime type that has emerged that's really targeting our boys that are about 13 to 17 years old. Unfortunately, we're seeing suicidal ideation, and in some cases, unfortunately, deaths by suicide as a result of this type of sextortion. And so, what we're seeing now is that, again, these boys, these victims, are not even engaging. This particular case, this child was just sitting there, and up pops this DM that says, I had an intriguing idea to create a video where you be pleasuring yourself on one side while looking photos of your acquaintances. If you don't do this and give me money, I'm going to share it with your entire network. So here's this poor kid just living his life, on social media, on a gaming app, and this pops up. So this doesn't even require him to engage in any way. And now this is being held over him to, again, pay up, or else this is going to happen. And so these are all the different ways we're seeing this kind of come to fruition. We talked about low barrier CSAM, easy for offenders to kind of test the waters to see if it's for them. That at least I didn't hurt a child defense, and how far does that get them? Another thing that's a grave concern is also possible desensitization to true CSAM. I mean, ultimately, are we going to get to a space where we see, CSAM and go, or any crime against a child and go, yeah, it's probably fake. Yeah, it's probably fake. What if it's not? What if it's not fake? And that was our one chance as kind of the good people to do something on behalf of that child to help them. And if we just dismiss it as generative AI because we're kind of, desensitized to the fact and just assume everything's fake, these true victims may not get the support and help from law enforcement, from NGOs, for all child serving professionals who are trying to help them. The deep fakes we're seeing again, are just as upsetting for the true victims. They see the harm in it. They understand how this could impact them down the road. Kind of unclear and inconsistent prosecutorial approaches and perspectives. We're hoping to change that. We're seeing a lot of good case law coming forward across the states. I'm going to talk in a minute about some federal legislation that's being pending right now. So really interested to see how far this goes to help start guiding the way and providing a pathway for us in terms of defining and charging and prosecuting all these types of crimes. And then finally, wasted law enforcement resources. I mean, Officer Wright was already talking about all the cyber tip line reports and cases that they have related to child sexual abuse. And if we're looking for a child for victim identification efforts who doesn't exist, that means we are spending manpower time away from true victims who need assistance. So we could have a real wasted resources potential here when we are kind of chasing our tails or chasing children who don't exist and taking away our ability to helping kids who do exist and need assistance. So those two pieces of legislation I just want to highlight right before we close is the SHIELD Act. That was actually put forward by, I believe, Senator Cornyn was the sponsor of that, criminalizing the distribution of visual depictions of a nude minor in instances where the images are exploitive but do not meet the federal definition. So many of these images would fall under that because they are not maybe necessarily prosecutable as a CSAM, but they could be pursued under SHIELD. And then Take It Down, which has strong traction right now. We really hope to see this kind of pass with flying colors across the board soon. This is sponsored by Senator Cruz here in Texas. Really specifically talks about deepfakes, which is great because it's truly addressing the GAI and the technology, the deepfake technology, to say that those are exploitative images, those are sexually abusive images. So two really important legislations that we see coming down the pike. Take It Down is super active. We're really encouraged by it. So that would be great to have this on the books. And then finally, so that it's not all doom and gloom about there's nothing to be done, a couple of things I just want to highlight. One is NCMEC's Take It Down service. So this is a global tool. It's anonymous. It's very easy to use. You pretty much go to the device where the picture was taken, so the child's device or the child's computer, and you basically go to takeitdown.ncmec.org. You select the image or video that you want to hash. The image or video is not transferred to us. Nothing leaves the device. We just create a hash value, which is like a digital fingerprint of that image. That is what is submitted to us. It is then banked for our participating companies, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, and they can help stop the blocking of posting of that imagery. And so anyone is able to use this. We really try to promote it towards kids for them to use right off their device when they've now seen that there's been non-consensual distribution of their intimate images, and they want to do something to help stop the proliferation of these files online. So we've got some great materials about it on our website. Highly encourage you to look at. We don't ask for names, locations, email addresses, nothing like that. It is truly anonymous. It's super easy to use. But we really want to make sure that we're helping kids understand that, again, while we can't scrub the internet, we certainly can help them with getting some of these resources down. And then as we close, I would also just say, what can you do as a parent when something like this feels so powerless? The best messaging that we're offering right now is two things. One, talk to your kid about not just being a bystander, but what we would call an upstander, which means that if this is going around in their school and they receive it, don't just pass it on. Don't just laugh at it. Say, hey, this is really stupid. This is really mean. Report it. Stop it. Like, don't be a part of the cycle. Stop the cycle. So we're trying to use that phrase upstander instead of a bystander of watching this awful thing happen. Participate in it on behalf of your classmate and try to get it to stop, report it. And then finally, one of the best things that we're recommending is have a plan of action with your child. The same way that you do a fire drill about what to do if a fire breaks out. We're all going to walk around down the hall. You're going to climb out the window. We're going to meet out in the, driveway. Have an action plan with your child. If this were to happen, here's what we're going to do. That does two things. One makes them know it's okay to come to you if this happens, and they don't have to be scared to approach you. And two, that you're there to help. So we also really want to make sure that we empower children that if it does happen, they go, okay, we practiced this. I know what to do. Mom said, come to her. And then we're going to go to NACMEC. We're going to go to law enforcement. We're going to do some things. And so in that moment of it happening, at least it's not totally powerless. Your child's equipped to know, okay, this could have happened. I know we talked about it, and now I know what to do. And really empowering kids to kind of take action if that happens. So I know we're at time. There's my contact information. Always happy to answer questions now or later. Caroline, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for, as always, a fantastic presentation. One of the things I just wanted to highlight really quickly, because I was so impressed with that Take It Down resource, and I know I've heard you mention in the past, we were telling kids, if you put something on the internet, it's going to be there forever, but that it can actually, how that can actually be demoralizing for children, and they can have this really quick response that has resulted in, suicides or serious harm. So I think that's so fantastic, and that kids need to know that this Take It Down is a resource that's available to them. And I love that call to action as well. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our speakers today. I've received so many messages about just from my colleagues, from participants about how much they've learned today. And that's all due to our experts who joined. And then we've also received kind of marching orders, right? I also would encourage you to engage with policymakers and raise awareness in your communities. This was something that I became much more educated on and aware of in the past year. And so we have to continue to spread the word, and we have to look at some of those systems that we need to change. How do we encourage our schools to educate children as well? How do we together create that community and safe environment for children, both online and offline? Before you go, if you're still on, we just encourage you to complete our event survey. You can grab that link. I think it's both in the chat, and you can grab a quick photo of our QR code as well. Thank you again to our sponsors, Uber and HEB. And our next learning event will be the Education Summit on June 6th from 10 to 12 as well. And it is a free virtual summit, so we encourage any of you who might be interested to sign up for that as well. Once again, thank you so much to our speakers. It was such an incredible learning event, and we're excited to continue working together. Take care, and we'll see you again.